welcome to the Messianics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby. Hey guys, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Messianics Podcast. And as we get started today, we had a question come in essence asking, I'm being handed the actual question, so I'll just read it point blank. It's from Susie. It says, I would love to hear how each of your families do Erev Shabbat, including how you each word your blessings that you say for each thing and explain why you use that blessing, etc. Please especially take into consideration our listeners that are new to Messianic Judaism. This has been a hot topic lately with some of our friends. So this is a really interesting question to be posed, a really interesting discussion to be had, and my assumption is that the question has more to do with the liturgical side, what prayers are said and what have you, and we're going to dive into some of that in a few minutes. But one of the things for me, like Messianic Judaism, again, as we say all the time, there's wide variances, and typically speaking, a Messianic congregation is either going to have a Friday night or a Saturday morning service. Some may have both, like that's how they do two services or whatever. At least for our congregation, I can't speak for Brit-Am, but for CMC, I've never really been a huge fan of Erev Shabbat services at the synagogue. Not that they're wrong, it's just never really been a part of kind of my vision of a Messianic congregation. A big part of that is because I truly think and feel like Erev Shabbat should be spent at home around the dinner table with family, invite friends over, people from your congregation come and join you as you relaxingly and peacefully usher in the Shabbat. And my experience having grown up in a congregation that had Erev Shabbat services is most Erev Shabbat services start at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And, if you've got young families, that's bedtime. So now the kids are not going to bed when they're supposed to, and they're a train wreck in service, and everybody's looking at the parents judgmental because their kids are a train wreck in service because they're not in bed. People are not able to enter the Shabbat with peace and relaxation or anything like that because they're rushing home from work. They're going to really quick get changed, and whatever they can shove in their face real quick for food, they're going to grab on the way out the drive-thru, on the way to synagogue, and then they're going to get in a service, but they're just literally going from one running to another running to another running into service, and there's no chance to really reflect on what the entrance to the Shabbat really is and is all about. And so this is a really interesting question because of the fact that I think Erev Shabbat around the dinner table is such a very important part of the Jewish experience. And so as we dive into this, I just wanted to kind of prompt the conversation by talking about that very idea, that there is a reason why Erev Shabbat is so often spent around the dinner table, and the progress of the evening liturgical aspects kind of flow around that concept. So I'll kind of toss it out there and let you guys kick off the conversation, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I agree. This Rabbi Eric, by the way, I agree that Erev Shabbat should be a centralized family event. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a synagogal service, and my synagogue growing up had both Erev Shabbat and Yom Shabbat services. But at our synagogue, we have just the Shabbat morning service, and we encourage our families to have a Shabbat at home, to invite friends and people that they would like to introduce to their faith and what they believe in a non-synagogal atmosphere where there's a little more relaxed, a little more freedom to just kind of enter without feeling like you're entering into a synagogue or a strange location. You're just going to somebody's house for dinner. So that's really important. I want to say, as we begin to discuss what we actually do at our own homes and how we do it and what we say, that if you are observing Shabbat at your house and at the end of Shabbat you feel worse than you did before you started because you let it become overwhelming or disheartening or dysfunctional or whatever, you were working so hard to have a Shabbat meal that you missed out on Shabbat, then you need to back off and just do Shabbat without all that stuff. That it's nice to have a nice meal. And growing up, Shabbat, you'd start on preparation day. You actually started Thursday evening to start preparing for Friday evening. You spent the day preparing the afternoon so that it wasn't an overwhelming thing. Nowadays, most people get home from work in the evening and they're trying to rush to get a whole Shabbat meal to have the roast and the potatoes and all the stuff there. And, you know, if everything doesn't go perfectly, which very rarely does everything go perfectly, and then you enter in and you're fussing at your kids, you're fussing at your husband, things didn't go well, and then, okay, this is our Shabbat, then you're missing the whole point of Shabbat, which is supposed to be a time we enter into rest and fellowship with Adonai. Matter of fact, one of the liturgical prayers for Erev Shabbat is Shalom Aleichem, which is peace be unto you. Ministering angels of the Most High, coming forth from the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. But which is not that God is sending angels to us, but that on Shabbat we enter into the heavenly throne room and the angels come to greet us as we enter into that sacred space and time. So it's really important that we understand that Shabbat is about entering into God's space and not so much about ours. So if you come to Erev Shabbat and you only have time to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Kool-Aid or whatever for your family to eat so you can have a relaxed time of family time together without the pressure and everything, then just have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Don't try to overdo it. And the same thing with the liturgy and the prayers. If you don't know the Hebrew prayers and you want to do prayers, read the prayer in English.
Yeah.
God, this will surprise some people, but God understands English. And so it's nice to be able to do the Hebrew prayers, and we do them at our home. But if you don't know the Hebrew prayers, just relax and do the English until you learn the Hebrew prayers.
And one of the old traditions in, especially the ultra-Orthodox community, but Orthodoxy in general, is that on Shabbat, and particularly on Erev Shabbat, that everything is your best, right? So you're dressed up, you're wearing, your best clothes, you've got the best spread on the table and all this. But the reality is, especially in the world we live in today, sometimes just having the opportunity, like Rabbi Eric was talking about, like PB&J is the best you can come up with for Shabbat, then do that, right? Sometimes in our lives in this world that we live in the 21st century, sometimes just being able to stop, whether it's, cutting off work or cutting off our phones or whatever, just stopping. Sometimes that is the best. And it's in that sacrifice of just stopping everything for the Shabbat and entering into it, trying to come in with a heart, a kavanah, the heart's intention for peace, for shalom, is a big part of it. And then from there, as you learn and grow and try to do, if you want to do more, great, but it's still got to be done with that heartfelt, that intentional, I am approaching the Shabbat to enter into God's rest, right? We talk about Jonathan Zettel had a great song about it, the Just One Shabbat, right? This idea that there's an eternal Shabbat awaiting us, and every single week we have the opportunity to rehearse for that one Shabbat awaiting us in the Olam Haba. And so there's this idea, this notion that this Shabbat is the best Shabbat we have, and the next Shabbat will be another best Shabbat we have until we're ultimately in the great Shabbat. And so this is an opportunity for us to rehearse that idea of resting in the presence of God. And again, that goes back to, I think that a great way to do that is around the dinner table, if you can, and celebrate with family and friends in that way.
I think a lot of it, I think all of it has to do with the intention of the heart. I remember the first time we had Shabbat dinner, it was me and my mom and my sister. And I do remember when we had been going to a Messianic congregation for a while and hadn't done it. And the reason why we hadn't done it is because we were trying to get through this perceived barrier that of all this religion and ceremony.
Sure.
And I think religion is a beautiful thing, and I think ceremony is a beautiful thing. But I think if those things are misplaced or solely focused on, it's disastrous spiritually. And we just felt like, what do we know? What do we know? Well, we know the Lord, and we're eager and we're seeking God, and that's really all you need. And I think that that night I just stopped and bought some wine and some bread, and Mom made dinner, and we said, I had a Siddur from our synagogue at the time, and we just read through those.
Yeah.
And that was, and it was incredibly memorable. I remember it, and I'll get into later, kind of what my wife and I do with our children and stuff. But I remember one time, it was a few years later after we had been having Shabbat dinner. By this point, I was leading worship with Brooke. We were both very involved in the synagogue and had learned a lot more. And we were invited to Shabbat dinner by another family at the synagogue who was actually having quite a few people over. And my mom called me and said, hey, where are you guys? And I was like, we're on the way. We're not going to miss it. We're on the way, because me and Brooke were running a little behind. And she goes, well, blank is here. And what I mean by blank is the person I'm not going to mention. And she has to start Shabbat at the actual time of sunset, which at that point was like 6:41 or something like that. And I said, are you serious? And she goes, yeah, we got to say the blessings then. And I said, well, then we're going to miss some. And I just think that's so ridiculous that's what she's worried about.
Yeah.
That's what this person's worried about. Okay, so you're going to get to walk away with, oh, well, we did it. We had Shabbat as soon as a weatherman said the sun's going to set.
Yeah.
And I think that was just silly. Again, as I always say, does God still love that person just as much as he loves me? She probably loves God just as much as I do. Maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. What I'm saying is the focus is off. Yeah. And you get what you put into it. Now, I have to mention this. Some people may like this. Some people may like this, that I'm going to say this. Some people won't. I've heard very polarizing opinions about the show The Chosen. But I do remember, and while there certainly are things in that show that are not that weren't recorded in the Bible, I think that they've embodied really well the spirit of, there's some things that absolutely did happen in the Gospels, a lot of what's in the show, but there are some things that they fill in, obviously. Took some liberty. But Miriam, the character Miriam, she's having Shabbat dinner, and she's like new to it, right? She'd just been delivered by the Lord, and she's new to it, and she's getting the Shabbat dinner ready, and she's incredibly insecure about it, and she's got like the prayers written down on this folded up piece of paper, and who shows up but the Lord himself, right? Yeshua shows up to her Shabbat dinner. Now, that didn't happen in the Gospels as far as that particular account of him coming to a Shabbat dinner from Miriam.
Yeah.
But that is one of my favorite scenes, and she keeps taking out the paper and reading it, and this is the Word of God. I mean, Yeshua was the walking Word of God. He was the Word made flesh, the very thing that spoke and rested.
Yeah.
That the very, Shabbat, the Shabbat himself, was sitting at her table, and I think that says so much to how God feels when he sees people doing it for the right reason, which is to connect with their family and worship God in spirit and in truth.
It's interesting. Rabbi David said earlier that on Shabbat in the Orthodox community, it's when they put out their best dishes, do their best clothes and all that. But there's something significant that he in that statement that he didn't delve into, and that is that when you traditionally think about Orthodox Jews, especially the Hasidim, when you think about them, they're wearing the black suits, white shirts, very plain colors, and very, very drab, non-flashy. But when Shabbat comes, they put aside the black and white, and out come these beautiful colors, and so it's not just their best, but they're entering into a rehearsal for a wedding. They're getting dressed to meet with God. And not in a way of legalism. Yeah. But if you really look at it, the black and white kind of would be the legalism. We're going to be plain. Everybody's going to look the same. We're going to line up. We're going to be bricks. We're not going to be stones.
Austere.
But when Shabbat comes, when they enter into that space, out comes the color and the it's like turning your television from black and white to color, and how alive and vibrant it becomes. And that's really what Shabbat's supposed to be. It's from the secular, which is the black and white, the norms of life, the day-to-day, to entering into the glory of the throne room with all of its beauty, or entering into the tabernacle with the colors and the vibrancy and the presence of God. It's a purposeful entering into that mindset.
Yeah.
And again, and Toby said it when he talked about the time of Shabbat. Now, should we try to do our blessings at the right time? Sure, why not? There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But if you're so legalistic down to the second you have to do that, then you're entering into, in my opinion, you're entering into the Shabbat in your black and whites.
Yeah.
Instead of entering in your colors.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's a different feeling to enter into that joy and the expression of it. And the beautiful liturgy that we have is meaningful.
So for the record, you're saying we should totally enter Shabbat like the Technicolor opening scene of Wizard of Oz?
Exactly.
I'm just thankful. I'm just thankful that God has never. Thank God. If God looked at my life and my performance and the things I've done over the years, and how long it took me to change, and how long it still takes me to change. If God was like this with a watch with me, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in big trouble. And I'm not saying let's start Shabbat at midnight. Maybe some people have to do that. What I'm saying is that, like Eric said, if your sole focus is we're right on the minute, I'm like, it's a good thing that you've not been on the minute. If that God doesn't expect you to be on the minute with everything, because the fact is we're a mess.
Yeah.
You know? And rest is not about. It's hard to meld religion and ceremony with rest and reclining and relax. I don't think that God wants us to look at it so methodical.
Yeah, I think it's you can do it, but it takes learning and of course being also just paying attention to what's going on and timing. Mm-hmm. Like for example, I don't. We. There have been plenty of times where I've just told Catherine if she's been stressed over whatever the day brought, and we get to, we're finishing up with dinner, and I've been out running errands, and I come home and I'm like, look, let's just sit down to dinner. We'll do blessings, but don't worry about candles and all the other stuff. Just like let's enter.
See, I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah, and because I like to light the candles according with the rest of Israel. So if it's at sunset, then we do it around sunset. But if we miss it, then it's like, okay, cool, we'll do it next week. We'll have Havdalah,
so
Saturday night,
So to jump into the actual question, let me go first.
One of the things that we'll do at our house, and then we also do it for like High Holy Days, where we'll have evening services. And around here, those evening services usually start right at or just after sundown.
Yeah.
So what we'll usually do is have a separate candle already lit.
Certain candle.
Instead of, so that you're not lighting the candles after sunset, but we have a second candle, or like a separate candle lit as a shamash almost, and then we'll use that to transfer flame to the Shabbat candles so that we can still do that. So if for whatever reason we're not able to start Erev Shabbat dinner, by the time that sunset's supposed to be, we still want to be able to include that custom, that tradition in the ceremony, even if it's a little bit later, but we'll do it by allowing for that transference rather than starting a new flame.
Yeah, and we've done that before. We just, most of the time when it... it's like it's more than just we won't do candles. We have to clean the candles and replace the candles, and I'm like, don't worry about it.
So let me jump in, because the part of the question was, what do we actually do at our house?
Yeah,
which is where I was leading with that. Yeah.
So at our house, my wife lights the Shabbat candles, and we say the traditional blessing, and there'll be some discussion about that, because the traditional blessing says, "Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us good commandments, commanded us to light the Shabbat candles." Mm-hmm. And the discussion is, did God actually command us to light the Shabbat candles? Well, the Scripture tells us to observe the traditions that were given to us, that were passed down to us, and that's a commandment. So if lighting the candles is a tradition that was passed down, then we are commanded to do the tradition. Now, I'm not arguing with the other folks, and if you like to do the one that says who has allowed us, or Yeshua, the light of the world, or one of the variants of that, then do the one you're comfortable with. But at our house, we light the Shabbat candles. We do the blessing over the Erev Shabbat Kiddush, which is a longer blessing over the wine. So it's not just the one-line blessing, but the whole Shabbat Kiddush, Erev Shabbat Kiddush. Then we do the blessing over the challah, the bread, and then we'll usually do one or two, either Adon Olam or Shalom Aleichem or something, and we rotate those. Now, the reason we rotate those is because I don't want it to become a rote thing. In the same way that they're at our Shabbat service on Saturday, there's certain prayers we do every week, but then there's other prayers we rotate from the Siddur, so that it's not just something you do from memory, but something that you can enter into with kavanah, with intentionality. And then we have our dinner, and then at the end of Shabbat we do Havdalah, which we'll probably talk about in another episode to close out the Shabbat. But that's how we do our Shabbat at home, and we have our meal together. Sometimes my kids and grandkids will come over and join us. Sometimes the in-laws. Sometimes other people. We try to use it as an opportunity to get family around the table. And sometimes that dinner will be a big meal.
Exquisite.
And sometimes that meal will be whatever
French toast
prepared in the refrigerator before, depending on because again, I don't want my wife or myself, and we're empty nesters now, so I don't want either of us to go into the Shabbat feeling as if we're burdened rather than freed.
Yeah.
Because that's the purpose.
For us at our home, and we do a kind of a home style Erev Shabbat dinner at the synagogue a few times a year for a couple of reasons. One is just to be able to get the congregation together to enter into the Shabbat in the way we would do it in our home. And then the other is for new people in the congregation, like this lady's asking this question about how do you do Erev Shabbat? A lot of people have no clue that there's even stuff that's done. And so it gives us an opportunity a few times a year to kind of walk people through it. And then I have a short, modified Erev Shabbat dinner, liturgical document that we hand out to everybody, and folks can take home or whatever, or we can send it to them. But for me, one of the big things to everything that we do at CMC, but also just in our life as a family, as Messianic Jews, is I think it's important to uphold Jewish tradition, but it's also, I think, important to recognize that what matters most is seeing Yeshua in those traditions. And so I think it's key to not just do something because it's supposed to be done, or not just do something because it's Jewish tradition, but if we're going to do it, to know that Yeshua is in it, to know that there's. So as we get ready to light the Erev Shabbat candles, one of the things that I always do is we read from John 1:1-5, which is the passage about Yeshua as the light, and so on, as that connective tissue into the lighting of the candles. And then usually we do a modified blessing at our home, not because I have any issue with the traditional blessing or anything like that. It just, again, it ties into that correspondence with Yeshua. So we usually do the who's given us Messiah Yeshua, the light of the world. And then in our Arab services for the holidays at the synagogue, we actually will do both to tie them in together. And then the next thing, because this is a very traditional approach, but it's also a very important thing, is we have the woman of the house. So in my family, my wife will pray over the family, and there's a special blessing that's said for that purpose. And so my wife will say the woman's blessing over the family, and then we'll turn around and put our hands on our kids, or if they're further away from us because the crowd at the table will kind of aim our hands at our kids psychopathically or something. But yes, I said that way intentionally.
Wrong word.
No, I said it that way intentionally because it looks goofy. But we'll point our hands towards our kids, and we'll say the traditional blessing over the children, which is may your be like Ephraim and Manasseh, and Rebecca, Sarah, Rachel, and Leah, with the Aaron, or the Birkat HaKohanim, the priestly blessing. And then I actually have I want to say it's from Isaiah offhand. I'm trying to remember that. I'll have to look it up. But let the Spirit of the Lord rest on you, Spirit of wisdom, discernment, Spirit of counsel and power, Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. that is a part of that blessing that we say over our kids. And by the way, in our Shabbat service at the synagogue, we also do that same full blessing that way over our kids. And then we sing Shalom Aleichem just because I love it. And back to like what Rabbi Eric was saying, this idea of being on the Shabbat, there's this elevation. We're entering into the heavenlies, and so it's this beautiful connection there. And one of the things I hear believers all the time talk about, we want to experience heaven now, we want to experience heaven on earth, and that is the key to Shabbat. That's the whole point to it. It's one day every week for our entire life that we get to experience heaven on earth. That's its whole purpose, is for us to rest in the presence of God. And so there's a prophetic kind of connection there that's of great importance. And then we'll sing the Shemru, which is just a biblical passage from the Torah that specifically is a reminder of the commandment of honoring Shabbat, stopping from our work and honoring Shabbat. Say the Shech Hayil, I generally would just say it in English because we're American. And I mean, if we're honest about it, most Jewish people in America are not fluent in Hebrew anyways. So when we're saying a lot of these things just solely in Hebrew, most people have no clue really what they're saying. But I think it's important if we're going to say something that we know what it is. So we'll say excerpts from the Shech Hayil. I won't read the whole.
Is that the Woman
passage.
of Valor?
Yeah, that's the Woman of Valor.
Sorry, for anyone who doesn't know what that is.
Sorry,
Proverbs 31.
Yeah, so we'll do a few excerpts from Proverbs 31 from the Shech Hayil, the Woman of Valor passage. And again, the extended Kiddush for Shabbat and the Netilat Yadayim, hand washing, again, because traditions aren't a bad thing. And when Yeshua was asked, why are some of your disciples not washing their hands? They didn't say, why are you, Yeshua, not washing your hands? So I think that there was an example set there for us that he did kind of adhere to some of these. And so we'll do Netilat Yadayim and Motzi, the blessing over the bread, and then dive into our meal. And we'll
I left the Netilat Yadayim.
Yeah.
Off of my we do that also.
Yeah. And then we'll dive into the meal and like there are so much there's so many more things that could be done in an Erev Shabbat dinner, and the more you do, great. The less you do, okay, that's fine too. The key for me is the time around the table, recognizing what's going on, and when we're able to, and the conversation's going, it's always great to be able to take the time to talk about the Parsha, or what's going on in your life this week. What did you see happening? What did you see God doing in your life? And then we'll do Birchat Hamazon, or an abbreviated Birchat Hamazon.
What is that again?
The blessing
over the meal.
Yeah.
Okay. I knew what it was. I just
at the end of the meal, there's a blessing. In Judaism, we say the blessing after the meal. There's blessings for different aspects, like the bread and the wine, but after the meal is when we say what in Christianity would be called grace or thanksgiving prayer for the meal. Because the Bible says, after you've eaten and are full, then bless the Lord.
Yeah. What we do, this is Rabbi Toby, we get everybody around the table. Brooke always lights the candles. And she does say the prayer. She says, blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his word and given us Yeshua the Messiah and has commanded us to be a light to the world. I don't have an issue with any of the other ones either. I just like to mention Yeshua right at the start.
Right.
So she lights the candles and says that. And then I say the Vishamru. And we say it in English first, and then I sing part of the Vishamru. We all do. Me and Brooke and the kids. We sing the Vishamru, B'nai Yisrael. And then then I bless Brooke. I say, and I just say it in English, I say part of Proverbs 31. And then she reads Psalm 112 over me, which is Psalm 112 is it's about essentially the blessed. I mean, it's just it's a psalm. I think, but it really describes like a man of God. Mm-hmm. So the person that I want to be, that I aspire to. I think we should always continue to be aspiring, never feeling like we arrived. But she reads Psalm 112 over me, and I think, ladies, if there isn't necessarily a prayer for the husband as far as that, in the Shabbat Siddur, but I know that Psalm 112 is a good one. Psalm 128 I've heard has also been used.
Yeah, that's what I use.
Yeah. So, cool. Okay. So I do Proverbs 31 over Brooke. She does Psalm 112 over me. Sometimes there have been times when I've really been going through stuff. Brooke, she knows all my secrets. outside of the Lord. And sometimes she'll say, I'm going to read this over you today. I remember one time, she's read other things over me. I remember one time I was really struggling with something personal. This is before I even met my wife. And my sister actually read Psalm 32 over me. I was just struggling with guilt over past sins. And it was a beautiful thing. It was, and this is all during Shabbat, before the meal. And I think it's really beautiful. So, but Psalm 112, Psalm 128 are really good. I think good places to start. And then we bless the kids. I say to my son, may the Lord make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. And I say to my daughter, may the Lord make you as Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And then I do the Aaronic benediction. And then we bless the bread, bless the wine, have the meal, and we might sing Shabbat Shalom afterwards. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes the kids just break off. But that's what we do basically.
At different times.
Yeah, we keep it simple. We keep it simple, and sometimes it's really nice. And what's really cool about Shabbat dinner that I've learned is that one, you'll eat at the dinner table more often, honestly, than just on Friday at night, like that happened with my family.
Yeah.
You start enjoying that time more. And also, honestly, it makes it hard to, there have been times when Brooke and I, my wife and I, have been in arguments or a tense moment, Friday afternoon, and you kind of have to, it forces you to get it together and bless each other. And I think that's a good thing. It really brings you back to, it really recenters you. To use for lack of a better term, but that's what we do. We just keep it generally pretty basic. We do have little kids, and we, that's it.
Yeah, it really does. Coming to the table is a good thing, and I've had friends tell me that, friends who've been married for several years, that it's when they began to actually keep Shabbat, starting with the Erev Shabbat dinner as a family, they were like, that saved our marriage. That that awesome. Preserved our family.
Yeah, I believe
unity.
it.
Well, when you purposefully say a blessing over your wife, over the husband, over the children, it's not just rote terms or words. It's not just saying something to say something, but it's speaking God's word over somebody, and that has ramifications that are much further and deeper than we usually think.
Right.
And it keeps you together.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, and we rarely do this, and I didn't ask permission to do this, so I'm going to have to ask for forgiveness if it's not acceptable. But I've actually put together, now it's a project I started about a year ago, what I'm calling the Simple Shabbat Siddur. And it has all of the blessings that we talked about today, the different psalms, different things, and explanations. For instance, people ask, well, why do we say a blessing over wine? Well, wine is symbolic of joy and so on, but it's also a rabbinic tradition, a Jewish tradition, that when God created the world, he set aside a glass of wine, and that wine would not be drunk until the fullness of his kingdom. And that may be why Yeshua said, I will not drink of the wine again until I come in my Father's kingdom. And so there's biblical reasons and traditions and meaningful purposes for all of the prayers. These are not just rote prayers, but there's a biblical and a spiritual purpose for all the prayers.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say, if you would like a copy of that Simple Siddur, it's less than 50 pages long, and you just put your email on the link for this broadcast, this podcast, I'll email you a digital copy of that with the explanations, the reasoning, and all that. No charge for that. Now, that will be on Amazon, and I'll be charging for it there. But for anybody that just emails off of this podcast, I'll be happy to send you a digital copy of that Siddur so that you can, and it has explanations, and it says, look, if you go into this relaxing, go into this with purpose of entering into God. If you can't do the Hebrew, and it has the Hebrew, the transliterated Hebrew, and the English for all the prayers. So you can choose which one. If you can read the Hebrew, read the Hebrew. If you want to try reading the transliteration, incorporating, get used to that, do that. And if all you can do is read the English, God understands English, and he answers English prayers. So I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't done Shabbat, or maybe you've done a simple Shabbat, but you'd like to know more or understand some of the symbolism and significance about the different prayers, that you just post your email on the podcast link, or email me. I guess you could do that too. And I'll send you a digital copy of that, which will just give, it's very simple, very down to earth, but it just gives a simple Shabbat that you can do at home with your family with explanation. So if your children ask you, why are we doing this, or why do we do that, you have a written explanation that you can follow along with.
Yeah, and I have several. I think I have a couple Shabbat Sidurs, different ones. I have the one Avadami did a few years ago, and I have the Purple Book, the Messianic Shabbat Siddur that's been around.
Jeremiah Greenberg.
The Greenberg Siddur has been around forever.
And those have the liturgy, but they don't all have the explanation.
Right.
So
Yeah. And so, and we use the purple one just because it was given to me several years ago by someone, and normally what we do, it's very we very simple. Friday nights, Friday's usually preparation day, all day long. If there's errands to run, I'll run them. Sometimes Catherine will run them, depending on what it is. And then we just, we try to tidy up the house and clean up and get ready for the night. And when we remember to, we like to maybe, I like to at least, maybe, take a shower and change clothes, be a little fresher for the day, especially if I'm, living in Florida, it's hot down here, so you're running around sweating all day long, especially if you're outside doing errands and things. But and we'll come to the table with whatever is prepared for dinner, and then Catherine will do the candles, and we have no problem with the Orthodox, the traditional blessing of the candles, but we normally do the one that's in the Greenberg Siddur, which is who has given us Yeshua Messiah and commanded us to be a light to all nations. Yeah. And then we will do blessing over the wine and the bread. I'll read the select portion from the Eshet Chayil, and then Catherine just does her own prayer over me. She doesn't necessarily read from anything.
Sure.
And then we'll both bless. Right now we just have a baby boy, so we just do the boy blessing right now, and then we eat, and that's kind of it for us. Real simple. I have started doing this thing where I got Eli this little beginner's Bible with very simplified stories in the Bible, and so I'll make it a point to read him a little thing while he proceeds to nosh on his Cheerios there in the high chair.
And realistically, one of the most important keys, and we kind of hit on it earlier some, is really doesn't matter how much or how little of the traditional Erev Shabbat approach you take. That I think over time you'll kind of add a little more in here and there as you learn, and that's the key. You got to learn what you do, and as you learn, you've got to learn. Okay, well, number one is, does this fit in what we're doing? And number two, is this honoring to God? If I do it, I want to make sure I'm doing it right. Is it honoring to God when I do it? But the most important factor is that when we are entering into Shabbat, it isn't about the liturgy that we say. It isn't about the candles that we light. It isn't about the food that's on the table. It's not about the clothes that we're wearing. Yeah. It's not about any of that. It is about entering into the rest in the presence of God.
Yeah.
And so how much or how little you do, it really boils down to what is the kavanah, what is the intention of your heart. Are you approaching Erev Shabbat, walking into that beginning of Shabbat with that heart's desire of, I just want to encounter God.
Yeah.
That's all. I want to stop the outside world and I want to enter into the presence of God. Yeah. And I think some of the things that we've suggested in this episode are phenomenal ways to do that. And maybe the Lord's got things that He's building tradition in your family that adds to that, like Rabbi Toby and Rabbi Jonathan talking about some of the things that they do, praying over their wives and their wives praying over them and such. Maybe there's other things that are added into your own home that are intentional to you. I know Gary and Petra Scott with the Road to Jerusalem, who we're going to have on as guests with us in the next few weeks. Gary and Petra Scott, one of the big things that they do for Erev Shabbat in their family is they go through some of the blessings and such, but they actually are intentional about taking time for everyone in their household or everyone at their table to speak blessing over the other people at the table. And so they go around, kind of like people will do sometimes at Thanksgiving. Okay, what are you thankful for? What are you thankful? But they'll intentionally take time to sow blessing into the other people at the table's lives. And I mean, it's a really beautiful tradition. Right. And it's something that they do. It's not like it's something that's in a book somewhere that says, thou shalt do it this way. It's something that the Lord put on their heart that they added in, and it's a huge part of their entering into the presence of God every Shabbat.
Right, and so again, it's about intentional heart. It's about entering in. It's about doing it out of love, not legalism. If you have challah, wonderful. If you don't have challah, then whatever bread you have is fine to say the prayer over bread. If your challah burns because it didn't get, just kids got busy, you got busy, something happened, don't let that ruin your Shabbat.
Yeah.
Enter into Shabbat with whatever bread you have or whatever grape juice or wine you have. And if you don't have either of those things, believe it or not, you can have Shabbat without wine and bread. Because you can enter into the presence of God, which is the primary reason for Shabbat, without those things. Those things are ways we tell the story.
Yeah.
They're ways we symbolically enter in, point out, share with, and do. But if those things become more important than the actual thing, then you've lost yourself.
Yeah, I think I've got a good example of how to perspective, I guess, of this is, Shabbat is typified as a wedding a lot of times, and I just attended a wedding when I was in Charleston the other week, South Carolina, and it was when the invitations went out, it was called a black tie optional, which I had never heard of black tie optional. I knew what black tie was, and I knew what there are some weddings where you can just, like, for example, Catherine and I's wedding, like, there were people who just wore jeans and, tucked in a shirt and still looked good, but it wasn't, like, super formal, what have you. But black tie is, like, if you're a military...
I wouldn't know. I got stuck in traffic and didn't make it.
Yeah, I know. I felt bad for y'all. I wish y'all had made it, but whatever.
if you'd have left earlier.
Sure. But
that was leaving early.
But black tie event, it's like if you're wearing a tux, or if you're in the service, you're wearing your class A uniform or your mess dress. So I had to do some learning on what is black tie optional. I've never heard of that before. And so what it is basically it's the wedding party telling you this is an important event. This is something that means a lot to us. It should mean a lot to you. So we are asking that if you have a tux or a uniform, whatever your best is, you wear and bring that. However, if all you have and can afford is a dark pair of slacks, a white shirt, black tie, and a dark jacket, not a tux necessarily, but like I literally built my suit from like thrift store finds. Mm-hmm. And my black top, my bow tie was like on the sales rack. It was like someone had ripped it out of the holder or whatever, so it was tattered. I just took some scissors and cut the threads that were loose and made it look good. And if you don't have that, you can wear like a dark gray or a dark beige. So it doesn't have to be the $900 tux. It can be the $50 dark colored sport coat with slacks that you manage to fit together. But it's intentional, and it still looks good. It's not the $900 tux. It doesn't have to be the $900 tux. Everyone's equally invited. But it's
also not the jeans with holes.
But it's also not the jeans with holes in them. It's not the golf polo.
Right.
That So And again, there's nothing wrong with that. There are weddings where that's the dress code. That's fine. And so I look at Shabbat kind of like, the feeling and the spirit behind it is kind of like black tie optional. You show up with the best you have, and when you show up, if you're going to do a tradition, you do it right. If for example, if you're in the wedding party and you're supposed to, if you're a young lady and you're supposed to take the arm of some person to walk down the aisle just in order, you have no other purpose other than that, you do that. And you're there for it, and you're here for it. You're not just physically present, but you're all in spirit, all heart and spirit. So I don't know. That's kind of how I view Shabbat. It's sort of like a black tie optional event.
Yeah, I think, again, it's the intentionality of the heart. Yeah. It's what we do. It's purposefully doing for God, not because He needs it, but because you're showing love. It's kind of like when your kids, when they're small and they want to make you breakfast in bed for your birthday or something, and they do the best that they possibly can, and they're so excited about bringing you what they did for you. Not because you were demanding, not because of legalism, not because they were going to get crushed or something if they don't, but because they wanted to express their love for you. And that's how Shabbat should be. It's a way for us to express our love for God.
And ultimately, the part of this question was, this was a hot debate, hot topic among their group of friends or what have you. And ultimately, I just want to reiterate that this isn't about being right. It's about being faithful. And whatever that faithful looks like, if it is a very formal, laid out Orthodox approach to Erev Shabbat, go for it. If it's a more laid back, let's enter into Shabbat. You got busy family, you got little kids, you got, be faithful. The goal is to enter into the presence of God. The goal isn't about everything going on in the pomp and circumstance. It's about the presence of God. So we hope that this episode was a blessing to you, that you were able to get a lot from it. We talked quite a bit about some of the things that we each do in our own families, in our own homes, and even in our own congregations to some degree, and provided some resources, some ideas, some layouts for you of things that you could do to better implement if you're not already, or to maybe reevaluate how you implement a Erev Shabbat dinner in your own family. And we encourage you just to continue to press in with that intentionality of faithfulness into the presence of God on Shabbat. It is one of the most important, and I actually think the most important of all of the Moedim, as it's the one that's given to us every single week of our lives, not only once a year. So with that said, we thank you for listening, and we will talk with you guys next week. Thank you for listening to the Messiantics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at Messiantics Podcast.